morning, world, and good morning to you, Christopher.
Good morning, Alex.
All right. So we were just discussing that I have three clocks that are all showing different times, but I believe now we should be 10 a.m. in Stockholm where I am. So it's a sunny, nice day here, and as per usual, we have a lot of lovely people who have signed up for these wonderful masterclasses. But let's give folks a minute to join. Meanwhile, how are you doing, Christopher?
I'm doing quite well, I must admit. And you?
Nice. Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Stockholm is always nice. And with that being said, then let's get this started. So we have a lot to cover today, don't we? And hopefully you should all be able to see my screen now. First of all, I'd like to thank you sincerely for signing up to this masterclass. As I said, it's a packed schedule here today between me and Christopher, and what we're going to discuss is the topic of OT, or operational technology, especially in context of the visibility and CMDB area, which we love so dearly here at Einar and Partners. So first of all, for those of you who haven't joined any of our masterclasses before, maybe you're wondering, who is Einar and Partners? Very briefly, our sales pitch is pretty easy. We are an IT operation strategy firm where we focus a lot on governance and the strategy of ITOM. ServiceNow is our primary platform, although we work a little bit with LeanIX as well these days. But in general, I'd like to consider ourselves experts in data models, IT asset management, and CMDB related topics. And especially in the manufacturing space where, I don't know how many clients we've had by now, but at least something in the lines of 30 or 35 clients in the manufacturing space. So on the right side, you can see where our base of operations is. Although I am calling in from Stockholm today, we are a Dutch company, but as you also can see, we have clients, especially in Scandinavia, the Benelux region, and the DACH area. And I always say during these webinars, if you happen to call in from somewhere else here, please help us expand the map. But that's very briefly about Einar and Partners. However, I think most of you are here to learn today. And what will you be learning then? Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to discuss OT visibility. We're going to look at the core components of that, together with how we actually can scope the OT asset repository. What is it that we need to think about? We've done a number of implementations of OT visibility here at Einar and Partners. So me, together with my colleague Christopher, we'd like to share some very direct and tangible guidelines and tips when it comes to the implementation journey. And then my favorite topic, which is governance principles, is something that I'm going to bring up. Some housekeeping for those of you who have now joined the session. There should be a Q&A box, which you can type your questions in. So feel free to do so. If it's a quick and brief question, we may be able to answer it on the spot. If it's a bit more of an advanced question, we will save it for the end of the session. If it's a really advanced question, we may skip it, but can come back to you personally to discuss the question. So that's one thing. Secondly, this is being recorded. We always get that question. So yes, it's being recorded and it will be published on our YouTube channel. So feel free to share this with your colleagues, friends, and other people interested in the OT space. And with that being said, a proper introduction is definitely in place. So me who are speaking right now, my name is Alexander Ljungström. I am the managing director here at Einar and Partners, and I'm very passionate when it comes to IT operations in general, but especially in the OT space. I've had the pleasure now working actually together with you, Christopher, quite a lot. But the reason why I am very passionate about this topic is, well, it touches a lot around the topics of governance, of actually even organizational psychology. How do you get different sites to work to a common goal? How do you combine this with IT processes? It's a very, very interesting space where there is a lot of stuff happening right now. But I'm not alone. I have with me here today you, Christopher, and you are one of the first employees at Einar and Partners, and this is the first time we have a masterclass together. So, good things take time, as they say, but who are you, my friend?
So my name is Christopher. I joined Einar and Partners at the very beginning. I think I have employee number 4 or something like that, so it's very low. But I haven't had the opportunity to partake in one of these master classes before, and I'm very happy to be here today. My role, as you can see in the slide deck here, is OT domain expert, but I also work in the ITOM space, and I predominantly focus on how we actually go about populating our ServiceNow platform and how we then go about rolling out these solutions across sites and organizations.
Indeed, indeed. Super nice to have you on board here. So let's have some fun today here together with our beloved community who has joined. And as per always, I like to set the stage a little bit. Then I'm gonna hand over to you, Christopher. But probably a lot of you who have joined, you already know roughly what is operational technology. So we're not gonna keep it super high level, but I do want to speak a little bit of why are we doing a masterclass about this? Well, what we see right now, especially here in Europe, is that security requirements are getting tougher and the threat vectors are increasing, especially in the manufacturing space. Everything from ransomware to other sort of threats. This is now getting really, really serious. And obviously us as Einar and Partners being very focused on the asset repository, CMDB side, it's a natural next step for us to extend that towards the OT areas, especially as we have worked so much with manufacturing companies. But to be honest, ServiceNow is also pushing quite hard for their operational technology and industry vertical. So we see a lot of new developments. We see a lot of new acquisitions within this space, which we're going to touch very briefly upon today as well. And as I mentioned, we have now worked with plus 30 manufacturing companies. So that's why we decided to, hey, why don't we put our heads together and share some of the knowledge with you guys? But Christopher, maybe if you could take over the slide deck, and I think the next page here is what should people know about OT before we head into the rest of the webinar?
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. Just 1 second, and I will find the correct buttons to actually do the screen sharing as well.
Yes.
The typical technological problems that we have in every Zoom meeting, no matter who you are. They have the same exact issues over at ServiceNow as well, every time they hold one of these sessions. So, what do you need to know about OT? Well, first of all, OT, how do we access it? There are certain extension classes that we are interested in actually having in the CMDB. We're not here talking about the default classes that you get populated together with the standard package of classes provided by ServiceNow through, for example, ITOM Visibility. But OT provides additional extension classes on top of that when you have the OT module. And we are also interested in how to make proper use of the required OT modules and licenses. And when we talk about this, we will get a little bit further into that one because it's a bit more of a deep dive later in the slides. But then we have what is OT in ServiceNow. OT is a suite of product ranging from OT visibility to service management, asset management, and more. And what can I say about this? Well, most of you probably are at a stage where you don't have the maturity yet, maybe, to engage in, for example, asset management within the OT space. But OT visibility would be the entry port to the OT space. So that's why we're focusing on that one for this session. Where do we find OT? OT as such is something that we find in manufacturing plants mainly, but we can find it in logistical solutions, logistical hubs as well as one of the big ones out there, but there are many other spaces as well where we can find OT. How we define OT, that is a little bit different between organizations, but we will get a little bit further into that as well as we get along in the slide deck. Determining factors, the two strongest determining factors for OT is where something is located. So where in the company and where on the network. And by this, we mean, is it in the enterprise organization? Is it in a factory? These two can be determining factors, and we can break down into smaller entities depending on those two. Let's see, where do we? There. So how is OT then different from IT? Well, in the industries, we live with highly segregated air-gapped networks. This means that we usually don't have very good access to these devices that are outside the enterprise network. This means that we have, for example, robot cells out there that they are behind multiple layers of firewalls and completely air-gapped. We can't reach them in a very good way. We have problems engaging active scanning on a frequent basis. We might be able to do it once temporarily, but on a regular basis, the OT network usually don't allow these activities. And we also see that we have sensitive and very old, like really old legacy equipment out in the factories. One of my clients, for example, it says made in DDR on some of their machines. So there's some very old stuff out there. And as they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly.
In the ServiceNow, however, platform, however, OT assets are separated from IT assets. And this is a little bit of a head scratcher for some of my clients because we have the OT asset record. You can think of it similar to the IT asset record. And by IT asset, I mean the financial record, essentially, that we talk about. So what you would have in the HAM part of the platform. The OT asset is similar to that, but focused on the OT space. This means that we can have IT records that are shared between IT and OT. And this is a space where there is some confusion sometimes when it comes to the clients. We have different CMDB classes, and as it says, we will speak more about this later, but we have dedicated CMDB classes for OT. We have shared CMDB classes for OT, and then we have a way of distinguishing these shared classes when it comes to actually using them in OT. And then we have different requirements on data loading. How often do we do it? What type of data loading do we do? And which tools do we use? So all of these are pretty much different. We have a commonality when it comes to, for example, discovery. It can to some extent be used in ServiceNow, and they are expanding significantly into that space. But we will get further into that as well later in the slide deck. So what is the OT product and core components? Well, we have four main components targeting the CMDB, vulnerability, ITAM, and service management. OTV, Operational Technology Visibility, is the core module for populating the CMDB. It used to be that we started with a module called OT Foundations. That's now baked into OT Visibility. And by them integrating these two, we also get not just the operational technology manager, which provides the core functionality around OT, but we also get the industrial process manager, which wasn't part of, for example, OT foundations. And this module is a pretty big part of where we actually can gain some significant value from OT. And we also get the discovery and service graph connectors for OT systems. So for example, we have Nozomi is a very common service graph connector for OT systems. And then we have Defender for IoT is a relatively common one as well, on top of Discovery. And then there is a specific service graph connector also designed exclusively for OT, which is made for you bulk uploading data to the platform, including validations of that data. And this can be done through Excel uploads.
I didn't know that was a service graph connector. So now I learned something.
It is actually a service graph connector.
Okay.
So it does validations and a bunch of other calculations in the background. It integrates with the IRE as well.
Okay, interesting.
Then we have operational technology vulnerability response, specific module for vulnerability management, similar to how we have on ITOM or ITOM visibility space, so the regular CMDB space. Operational technology service management, OTSM. This is the ITSM processes specifically for the OT environment. And while you can technically make adjustments to your platform to enable reporting incidents on your OT environment using the ITSM module, I might not necessarily recommend you doing that. You will most likely end up making quite a significant amount of adjustments unless you just want the actual reporting functionality. And the background to this is because OT utilizes, for example, the ISA 95 standard. And in ITSM, we cannot access that information. You might also run into certain issues with access control, for example.
Okay.
And then we have operational technology asset management. Well, this is a dedicated asset management module similar to HAM for OT. So in OT, while we have the assets, if we import them from IT, for example, we might not have the same type of asset management capabilities for dedicated OT resources all the time.
Interesting. And I could mention here one thing that we actually didn't include in the slide is OT health, which is the event management piece for OT. But I think today primarily, obviously, we're speaking about the visibility part, right, Christopher?
We're primarily talking about the visibility part, correct. And something I didn't put in this slide either is that the operational technology manager also includes a bunch of useful out-of-the-box dashboards and its own set of OT health, like CMDB health, similar to that one.
All right, interesting. And if we move to the next part then of now when we know about OT a little bit, so how do we scope this? And I think if we take the next slide here, if you go ahead for me, then of course when we if you go to the next one, Christopher.
Yes.
Thank you. So now, thanks, by the way, for setting the scene. What is OT and sort of on a high level perspective? I see actually we already received some questions, but before I go to them, let me speak a little bit about some common scenarios we are facing at Einar and Partners. And I'm quite sure that some of you who are working in a manufacturing company recognize this. So one is IT versus OT, that it tends to be quite unclear responsibilities. I'm not going to read through everything here on the slide, but essentially who owns what? When is something becoming an OT device versus an IT device? It's not just, and actually that was one of the questions, it's not just about the classes or the computers, but it is about which function the infrastructure have, for example. So we often see that it tends to be a challenge on just defining the responsibilities, especially from a CMDB perspective. Then we have impact. We do see that a lot of companies, they obviously have Excel sheets and other things, but really understanding and maintaining and contextualizing impact, that can be difficult. So what do we mean with impact? Well, what's the relation between a device to a production process? Which site does it belong to? What is the criticality? How do we use it in change or incident management? Or it could be other things as well. As I said in the beginning, we see a lot of security and compliance on NIS2, NIST, etc. Again, criticality of assets come into picture there. And then finally, in general, governance and life cycles in OT. If you look at a lot of these global manufacturing companies, there are often at minimum dozens of sites, if not even more. I have seen some companies which defines their sites let's say in very small chunks. So we're speaking of hundreds of sites, and each site is having obviously their own devices, their own local IT, etc., etc. But how do we actually govern this? How do we care about the life cycles? And that brings us actually to the title here a little bit, that often another challenge is simply that data is spread across way too many or too few tools, locations, and responsibilities. So this is often the entry point that we come into a little bit. And this is a little bit where OT visibility helps. So Christopher, on the next slide here, I think we break down there even further what OT visibility means. Could you say a few words about that?
Well, like I mentioned before, the core platform provides workspaces and dashboards that help you in the regular operations. It provides the CMDB classes and extension classes needed to actually work in OT and to keep these items segregated from your regular IT infrastructure in the CMDB. For example, the ISA 95 classes and how we interact with those, how data is saved for the specific OT classes, how we segregate IT infrastructure that has been promoted into the OT environment. That type of functionality is provided through the core platform. Then we have discovery, where we have normal discovery. Well, what can we say? It's a regular discovery, but we put it in the OT environment. This also means that for now, until ServiceNow goes ahead and creates further integration with, was it Armis that they bought?
Mission Secure.
Mission Secure.
Yeah.
And they are acquiring companies to improve the OT discovery, Mission Secure being one of them. And when they actually add that into the discovery functionality, we will see more of an expanded functionality on the discovery side. But for now, we are relatively limited to spaces where we have somewhat standardized network access functionality. Let's say Purdue level 3, and in some cases, maybe down on Purdue level 2. It depends on how your firewall structure is set up in your organization. And this is
can I just add there, Christopher, that we see a lot of companies, obviously, like discovery can be done on Windows, Linux, and other things which may happen to be in the manufacturing plant, but then a lot of these legacy devices that is running maybe old obscure protocols or are highly sensitive, basically what you said. We see there that, well, what we mentioned in the beginning, that active scanning or discovery is either forbidden outright or simply is not possible due to the old protocols running, right?
Absolutely. That is Completely correct. But we also see that there's quite a lot of stuff out there that could be relatively difficult to find, even if it's modern. We have sensors and things like that you could be interested in having in the CMDB, but network connectivity would be very difficult, or even if you have network connectivity, getting an active scanner to reach that and communicating with it would still pose a challenge due to, for example, the obscurity of SNMP sometimes.
Yeah.
Then we have process management, where we can make full use of the ISA 95 entities. So building the full hierarchy, starting from a site level and then breaking down each site into smaller components to create a good granularity, and also building similar to how we would do with a service map, the relationship stack, and creating the dependency view to actually see how the relationships interact within the organization. And finally, the service graph connectors, where we can ingest data from them through Windows Defender, Clarity, Nozomi, Armis, and a bunch of other systems that are available as service graph connectors from ServiceNow today. So these are the core components of OT visibility.
Super interesting. So I think if you stop your screen share, then I'm gonna take over. So now when we have looked a little bit at those visibility components, then let's zoom in even more. So, okay, not that far back, here. So, what does this then mean now when we speak about what does this bring to OT CMDB and assets? Well, we've spoke about these OT classes so far. We say here asset classes. Most people, we know that we speak about CMDB classes, but these are some examples of these classes that are being brought into the system. So OT supervisory systems, OT control systems, OT field devices. So you can find your typical things like historian databases, human-machine interfaces, SCADA clients, PLCs, CNC machines, whatever it is that your manufacturing company is using, together with what Christopher mentioned, like industrial sensors and so forth. We're going to speak a little bit on how to scope this in a while, but then we come to this, and this is maybe the more critical point, which is the operational elements. So especially what is known in OT as equipment models, and that is essentially the sites, and that is what Christopher spoke about. So this largely follows the ISA 95 standard, and this is an example here where you have a site, below there you have an area, then you may have work centers, and then finally you have work units, for example. It's likely that your organization, maybe not calling it exactly like this, but at least something in similar terms. And this is the contextual elements, which is so important. And apart from that, so this is determining the levels essentially. But then we also have things like criticality. What is the actual criticality of a device? One type of device, if it goes down, well, it might mean a complete production stop compared to another type of OT asset. If that goes down, well, it's not great, but you can still keep the floor running, let's say. And then, of course, things like ownerships and relation to various production processes. What is important here is that any of these OT assets can be correlated to any of these site or levels. And this is also often where you put the governance on, which we're going to speak about in the end of the webinar. But the question here always becomes how granular to go here in these equipment models and hierarchies. And Christopher, you have been speaking a lot about ASI 95, which ServiceNow largely base their equipment models and this sort of levels and contextual data on. But like mentioned here, differences may apply. So this is really what the OT visibility module brings in largely. And then, like Christopher mentioned, you can populate all of these different classes here from various sources like service graph connectors or Excel imports, etc. I want to speak now a little bit about the typical implementation journey. So we've gone through a number of implementations now, and you can take this maturity model with of course, a grain of salt, but it tends to look something like this. You and me, Christopher, had a pretty interesting discussion here the other day, but it often actually starts with the governance piece. And more specifically, we need to define and build the sites in ServiceNow. That is the first starting point, and often starting with like a critical site, for example. Now, after that, we go to governance on a site level. And that means, okay, we need to include the managers. What are the basic roles here? What are things like support groups? And then also role-based access controls. Once we have that on a site level, then we can actually start understanding and scoping the classes. So actually defining these OT classes, when you look at it, you may think, well, we use everything of it. But do you really need everything? That is the first question. Do you need everything from day one, or is there a stepped maturity here? So starting with defining the classes, attributes, and of course, some simple corresponding health rules. This is the first piece of the governance. Once you have that, it becomes much easier to start understanding how do we do the population of data. And as mentioned, there is multiple methods of doing that. Now, once you are at this stage, from a CMDB perspective, you might be quite covered for one or two sites, but then you have this little piece of usage. So actually using and connecting this to other processes. So things like security reports, incidents, vulnerability, etc. And this is often where we see most companies as a, let's say, version 1.0 of their OT. It tends to be on this space here. Anything after that, we would refer to as more refinement, where the site levels and contextual data and data quality, etc., you can increase that granularity, obviously given that it provides a business value. And we actually recommend this process manager to wait with that a little bit further down the line. And yeah, we're going to speak a little bit more about that too. But roughly something like this is the normal, let's say, OT journey for visibility, which we have seen quite successful. Granted, some of you here might be sitting now thinking, well, we did something similar, but not exactly like this and so forth, and that's okay, but something along these lines. Start with governance, start thinking about how do you populate this, start thinking about how you're going to use it, and then backlog refinements for later, essentially. So I hope that gives a good indication. But if we break this down, what would then be, Christopher, these basic building blocks? How would you describe them briefly?
Well, OT discovery consists of OT classes, the OT discovery import, OT asset inventory. So basically, which type of devices do we want to actually populate in the CMDB? This is something that we need to scope. Do we need or want everything in the CMDB to start with? How do we go about actually discovering and importing this information into the CMDB? Which different types of ways do we have access to doing it through? Do we have to do it manually? Do we have to do it through a service graph connector? Do we need to refine the data that we get in? And how do we then manage the asset inventory? Then we have the OT context. We have the sites, we have the various levels and asset criticality. So on the site, and I want to highlight here that site is not necessarily something that is the same thing as a location. I want to make that clear, though it might in practice be the same thing, but the site and location attributes are two separate ones, and we have more items connected to the specific site, and a site can have, for example, sub areas with different locations. But let's not delve too much into the complexities of building a site right now. Then we have the various different levels. So we have the ISA levels, ISA 95, high level levels, and then we have the Purdue levels. And we need to take a look at this as well, plan for it. So do we need at the start of a project actually all the ISA 95 levels going from the site at the top down to, for example, all the different steps down until we reach a robot cell, as an example? Do we need all of that? Or is it sufficient that we just start with site, we populate everything on the specific site, build the necessary information there, and then we grow in maturity? That would be my recommendation. And then we have asset criticality. How do we define asset criticality within this site and or part of the organization? Which type of devices should have certain types of criticality? It might not be reflective of what it looks like in a typical IT organization. So this is something that can be difficult. And I see that several of my customers have simply skipped assigning asset criticality because it's too difficult at their current maturity.
Interesting.
And then OT governance, lifecycle and maintenance. How do we actually go about handling this? Who is responsible for actually managing the life cycles? What will be the processes when we actually get all of this stuff into a centralized tool? Who will maintain the data? Will it be the same people as actually response to incidents? In ITOM, we would have a support group and managed by group. Is that the same thing in your organization when it comes to OT governance? We need to build how-tos and blueprints because even if we have people, for example, from the IT side of OT that are experienced in working in ServiceNow, we are reaching a larger audience. When we get into OT, we will be dealing with people working on the factory floor. They will most likely want to be able to see how things are interacting. They will need to have access to KB articles and many other items that are probably going to be migrated into ServiceNow if you use this tool, just to gain the full value out of it.
Yeah.
And then, yes. And then
no, I was gonna say there, Christopher, just on that part, on the blueprints and so forth. What we need to realize here is that often we deal with local site managers and others who may be used to an Excel sheet for the past 20 years. So it can be a big transition for them. And it's actually something we strongly recommend. Don't underestimate the training. So yeah.
And something I've seen in a few customers as well is that when you sell this to your receiving sites, please be aware of if they have previous experience with a CMDB. Some cases, they can be averse to the word CMDB. So say asset management tool, for example, to make it an easier sell.
Nice. That's a good tip.
And then we have regulations and control. Which ones are we actually subject to when it comes to this type of stuff? Who is responsible for following up on it? What checks and controls do we need to put in place to actually follow up on this in ServiceNow? And through all of this, we of course have to consider security all the way. And my favorite part about security here in OT is that the site level of the ISA 95 in ServiceNow has a built-in dedicated role-based access control functionality separate from the all of the rest of the ServiceNow platform. So each site can be siloed on an individual level, team level, and the particular site level.
Yeah, super interesting. I think that's such a powerful functionality, really. And I see we get a lot of questions, and we only have 20 minutes left. So if you very briefly run through this, Christopher, who would some common stakeholders be that we interact with during an OT visibility project? Some rapid fire here.
Yes, absolutely. So network OT team, the network team, of course, they keep track of what traffic is actually on the network. OT team, if there is a dedicated one, then that is also important. Technical team, supporting team for the factory, they are important. They know what is actually on the shop floor. They actually go there and do stuff with these machines that are down there. They request information from the network team and operational team if there is a central one. Processes around security, rotating credentials, access rights, logging, and more. Probably more centralized management around those items, but whoever is managing this, very important to actually keep track of that and keep them in the loop when it comes to security. Owners, configuration management, factory and site SMEs, control and OT teams, individual infrastructure teams, and compliance and security. All of these are important in their own way. Configuration management, oftentimes we see there being a dedicated central team that owns the platform as such. Factory and site teams, they are stakeholders, very important to make happy. Control and OT teams, they are important from the perspective that they are consumers of this data, and they also provide data together with individual infrastructure teams. And then compliance and security teams, they are important because we need to make them happy as well from various different perspectives, especially when it comes to regulatory frameworks, but also ensuring that the data is kept safe.
Yeah, super interesting. And now we often come into a project, and then the question is, where do we start? How do we plan for these first sites? And I think here this is a simplified version, right? But we have a little bit of a playbook here. And if we would step through this, then, the first one, Christopher, it starts with identifying the critical sites and for example, which has the highest financial impact if they go down. It could be other things that determine criticality, of course, depending on the nature of your manufacturing company. But after that, where do we go from there, Christopher? Number 2, for example, and forward.
So it's good if we can identify some low-hanging fruit so that we get a relatively quick time to value. So where do we already have decent data quality? Is there any sites that have good quality Excel sheets, for example, that we could import directly into ServiceNow with just minor adjustments? Is there somewhere where we know that they have good maturity of network infrastructure and processes if we would like to deploy discovery, for example? And are there already potential integrations that we could do? Are there sites that have Nozomi or Defender IoT or any other available service graph connector that we could integrate with? And then establish governance. How do we go about defining support groups within the site or the different ISA levels? And who is actually going to then maintain all of this data in the ServiceNow? On top of this, we also have like site owner, we have a site manager, and these need to be defined on a site level, just so that they get access to all of this information as well. And definitely start early with training. Use the ServiceNow resources, get a central account so you can follow up on your stakeholders' progression through the trainings. So ServiceNow University, very good resource. When it comes to OT, it's not necessarily a super long training, but it's very valuable information for getting up to speed in a quick way. I think the basic slide deck is estimated for an hour, and then there are some training sessions on top of that with practical examples in a demo instance for the stakeholders to take part of, and they will learn how to interact with the platform. And then you can have ambassadors using click sheets and even videos for the site managers, so that you communicate it clearly and in an efficient way from the starting point. But training is definitely at the core when it comes to actually going into OT, because there is so much confusion that can happen.
We're getting a lot of interesting questions, and one very brief one here is the OT world usually connected to the CSDM services on the IT side? And if I'm not mistaken, Christopher, I believe that the sort of Purdue levels and sites, etc., isn't that indeed a derivative of the CSDM framework? Do you know?
It is not a derivative of the CSDM framework.
Okay.
It's a standalone structure from the CSDM.
Okay. Yeah.
Are they connected in other ways? That depends on your organization. For example, let's take technical services. Technical services can be provided to the OT organization.
Yeah,
do we
that's true.
provide business services to the OT organization? But that depends on your maturity and if it's applicable. I cannot say that for a certain if it would be correct for your organization.
Okay. Now it's an interesting question. So speaking of that, then let's have a look a little bit at the governance aspects then. So this is something where I've often been in the picture as well. And one thing we need to speak about is, how does OT governance stand out from the rest? And the first one here is that it tends to be quite difficult to identify central ownerships. And what do we mean by that? Well, in normal IT, it's quite easy to find the central owners for virtualization or network or Linux or whatever you might have. It tends to be a dedicated team, either internal or outsourced or something similar. But when you look at OT visibility, if you look at an OT class like PLCs, most of the time you don't have one group or one person in the manufacturing company who is responsible for all PLCs. But this tends to be very decentralized. So that tends to be one of those things on who has the decision-making powers of the actual design on the CMDB. Those CI class owners can be difficult to identify. Then what we've already repeated here, that contextual data is of super high importance. Of course, that is also true in normal IT. You want to know criticality and you want to know which application does something belong to. But especially in OT, then if you don't really have the site levels, you don't know where things are connected, what's the actual criticality of something, then it's difficult to derive any an actual value, I would say, from the OT CMDB. And then finally, I think a lot of people on the call already recognize this, that OT is not equal to IT. There is differences in requirements on data separation. There is differences in roles, responsibilities, and what you just mentioned, there is higher requirements on training as well. So great governance, in our experience, is not just put on individual OT assets, but is really to think on where do we put governance on a site or an area, work unit, or whatever it might be on that level as well. So that's the first thing. Then if we look at how does this then work in practice, some typical roles and responsibilities, this is now a quite convoluted slide, so I'm not going to go through it too much in detail, but you tend to have your company management and business stakeholders who set some sort of objectives. It can either be things like, hey, these are the requirements we have. An example could be in security. We want to see anything connected to the network. That's a classic use case. But it could also be other things, regulations that we need to comply to, we've done a merger and acquisition, we're gonna integrate a new factory, whatever it might be. But strategy and business objectives. Then ideally you should have an OT product owner, or whatever you want to call it. If it's not a product owner, it might be something else, but this doesn't necessarily have to be like a dedicated hire. But if you grow OT and if you grow the CMDB and really start using it, at some point this is going to start taking up time. But this tends to be a person often in the more central IT function, for example in the ServiceNow team, and that would be the OT admin of the CMDB. And that person, he or she, first of all, should provide training and mentorship in OT to all levels, both towards management and business stakeholders, but also down there. And this is where we get to the individual sites and users. So each site will have their site owners, their site IT manager, maybe even a support team for that site. And this person then should provide guidance on data loading, what classes are in use, other governance aspects like criticality. Maybe sometimes there are local requirements. You may be distributed in 3 different continents, and the requirement on data in Brazil is very different from the one in Germany, let's say. And of course, actually embedding the CMDB in other processes, so tools and reporting functionalities and so forth. So these are some of the typical roles and responsibilities once you start flying with your OT CMDB. And then finally, creating that good context. We've already discussed it, but where to put that ambition level. Here we see an example of a dependency view and dependency map in OT. And it's very easy when you start a project to think the more granularity, the better. But also there, we have to be realistic with what can we maintain and what can we, over time actually work with in the system. So we often say that start simple, focus on criticality and site level first, the fancy stuff can come later. And same with the ownership structures. Start simple, a site manager, a local IT manager who is supporting the site. Then later on, you can go even further into the granularity there. So this is just some quick golden nuggets when it comes to the governance piece. So with that being said, there's been a lot of context and a lot of things here we've been discussing. We also have a lot of questions that I want to leave some minutes for, but some advice from the field, and I think Christopher, feel free to fill in here, but start very small. I think that's something that we've seen successful in the past. We will run into lots of questions. There will be site managers and their teams. I guess, Christopher, they tend to, they're not just sitting there waiting for work. They tend to be rather busy, right?
They have a tendency to be very busy. I know that IT people are generally very busy, but OT seem to be even more busy than the IT people. So they have their hands full already. So they are not necessarily overly keen on getting extra work.
I bet. And then we have the focus on processes. So don't, and this is a direct advice also from me here. Don't just make it a central project. Involve the sites early on and various representatives. Otherwise, there is a risk that there tends to already be a friction between the sites and some sort of central authority. So if you don't involve the sites early, then you may even lose credibility and increase that friction further if you just come to them and say, this is now how you need to start using things. You will not be popular then. And also, number 3, put a low bar in the first version. So stick to the minimum classes, the data and the training, expand gradually. You know, we always say that ease and user friendliness beats the flashy features, but anything is better than an Excel, pretty much. So these are some of advice from the field that we have seen. And with 5 minutes left then, I think we've done a tremendous job in covering all of this content, and we've received a lot of questions. And I see you've answered some of them live even, Christopher, so thank you for that. I see here one question is that from Enrico that who is worried about discovery and governance and the maintenance of this data, especially when no one is taking ownership of the data. So governance can be an issue without a dedicated team, even if we call it an asset tool. Is there any approach you suggest for selling it to production plants? Well, I always say this when it comes to selling anything, not just in OT, but it's also very applicable here. It needs to be very tangible. Don't focus on features and so forth. Most people, they don't care that much about features. Well, us nerds maybe do. We like dashboards, we like all of these things, but people care about solving real problems and improving real metrics. So what could that mean? Well, if you can convince someone that they will spend less manual time, if you can convince someone that they will have to call less people when there is a problem, then you're starting to speak a language which makes sense. So the benefits needs to be tangible for the individuals themselves to be easier sellable. Of course, you can also work with a stick, which is that we simply need to be compliant due to regulations, and you have no option, basically. But I think when it comes to selling this, that can be the difficult part, especially due to the fact that people need to maintain this data as well. I see we also, let's see here, we got a question.
Espen has a very interesting question that I've received quite a few times before.
Okay.
How are the IT and IT/OT CMDB separated? This is an excellent question because the answer is they are not. IT and OT share the same CMDB, but they are in different classes most of the time. What is interesting here is that when we create an OT resource in the CMDB, we create an extension class record defining it as OT. That is the main driver for having it separated. So when we have OT resources then assigned to a particular site, then the role-based access control on that site starts enacting, or it takes effect, essentially.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the most common questions, maybe. How are they separated? So, yeah, thank you, Christopher. And I see there is also some other questions, some of them a little bit more in depth, maybe even. I think we only have 2 minutes left, so unfortunately, we won't have time to answer them right now. We will get back to you, though. But before you guys leave the webinar, I want to say a couple of things. One, we are scratching the surface here. So if you want to continue this conversation, scan this QR code. You can book a meeting with us. We can geek out together and discuss these things. No strings attached. You can also mail us at ping@einar.partners. But more importantly, since yesterday, we have launched a new ServiceNow OT benchmark survey from our research unit. And it would be really appreciated if those of you who are working in manufacturing and with OT answer this survey. It's completely anonymous. It goes very fast, like 5-10 minutes maximum. But what we will do with all of that data and survey is that we will come out with really, really good free content and best practices and insights, which you directly can use in your business to drive OT further. And not only that, if you fill out the survey, we will invite you for a closed strategy session as well, where you can get to see the breakdown and survey result from a lot of other manufacturing companies as well. Everything is anonymized, and we will also send out this survey as a link to the sort of follow-up email to this webinar. So with that pitch being done, I think we've done a pretty good job here, Christopher, of covering all of this. But I also would like to thank the audience for joining and who is so committed to these sort of masterclasses. We had almost 80 people signing up, so that is fantastic to see. And for those of you who want to stay in the loop, then as I said, we will publish this on YouTube, but please follow us on LinkedIn. Check out our YouTube channel. We will come out with a lot of OT content, especially this autumn and winter. Me and Christopher is working very diligently on it, and we're always happy to discuss these things. So I also thank you, Christopher. I think we should do more masterclasses together in the future, actually. So now you're not off the hook.
Looking forward to it.
Very nice. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining, attending, and have a great day out there, and good luck with your OT adventures, and see you around in the ecosystem. Thank you.
See ya. Bye.